Have you ever watched a kind person slowly change after betrayal? Not because they wanted revenge, not because they suddenly became cold, but because something inside them broke in silence. That is what happens when a good empath is betrayed. The world often misunderstands empaths. People think empathy is weakness. They think kindness means softness. They believe emotionally intelligent people will keep forgiving forever. But what most people never realize is this: an empath can survive pain longer than most people, but once the damage reaches the soul, the transformation becomes permanent. A good empath gives chances. They explain. They stay loyal. They carry emotional weight nobody sees. They absorb pain while pretending to be okay. And when they truly love someone, they love with full sincerity. But betrayal changes everything, because betrayal is not just disappointment. Betrayal is emotional destruction from someone the empath trusted deeply. It is the realization that the person they protected emotionally was secretly hurting them behind their back. It is discovering that loyalty was one-sided. It is learning that their pure intentions were taken advantage of. And when that realization finally hits an empath, the emotional shift is powerful. At first, the empath does not explode. They become silent. That silence confuses people, because outsiders expect emotional reactions. They expect screaming, arguments, revenge, and chaos. But many empaths do something different. They retreat inward. The betrayal begins replaying inside their mind like a broken movie. Every conversation suddenly feels suspicious. Every memory becomes painful. Every ignored red flag starts making sense. The empath starts questioning themselves. How did I not see this? Why did I trust them? Was any of it real? And this is where the deepest emotional damage begins. Because empaths do not only feel pain from betrayal, they feel guilt for believing in someone who did not deserve their trust. They replay every moment searching for answers. They wonder whether they were manipulated. They question their intuition. They become mentally exhausted trying to understand why someone they cared for could intentionally hurt them. And while the outside world keeps moving, the empath is fighting a war inside their own mind. This stage is dangerous, because betrayal attacks the empath's identity. Empaths naturally believe in goodness. They look for potential in people. They try to understand behavior instead of instantly judging it. Even when someone hurts them, they often search for explanations instead of revenge. But betrayal forces them to face a painful truth. Not everyone has a heart like theirs. That realization changes them forever. The empath slowly stops trusting words. They start watching actions. They begin noticing manipulation they once ignored. The emotional innocence disappears. And suddenly, the person who once gave unlimited emotional access comes guarded. People often say, "You changed," but they never ask what caused the change. The truth is, betrayal teaches empaths emotional survival. A good empath eventually realizes that constantly forgiving people who repeatedly hurt them is not kindness. It is self-destruction. And once that lesson becomes clear, the empath begins transforming. The first major transformation is emotional detachment. This shocks many people, because empaths are known for emotional warmth. They listen. They listen. Comfort. They give attention. They remember small details. They make people feel emotionally safe. But betrayal teaches them that emotional access is valuable, and they stop giving it freely. Now conversations become shorter. Their energy becomes selective. They stop chasing people. They stop over-explaining. They stop begging others to care. And for the first time in their life, they begin protecting themselves. This is where many toxic people panic, because manipulators depend on emotional access. They depend on the empath remaining emotionally available. They depend on guilt, emotional pressure, and emotional dependency. But once the empath emotionally disconnects, the manipulator loses control. And suddenly the same people who ignored the empath begin chasing them. Why? Because they miss the emotional benefits they once received. They miss the attention. They miss the understanding. They miss the unconditional support. They miss having someone who absorbed their emotional chaos. But by this point, the empath sees everything differently. Their emotional vision becomes sharper. The betrayal opened their eyes. Now they recognize fake apologies. They recognize emotional games. They recognize selective loyalty. They recognize manipulation disguised as love. And this creates another transformation. The empath becomes emotionally intelligent in a completely new way. Before betrayal, they used empathy mostly to help people. After betrayal, they begin using empathy to protect themselves. That is a massive shift. They stop ignoring intuition. They stop defending people who repeatedly hurt them. They stop making excuses for disrespect. They stop sacrificing mental peace just to keep relationships alive. And here is what many people fail to understand. The empath is not becoming cruel. They are becoming aware. There is a difference. A betrayed empath may still love deeply, but now they understand boundaries. Before betrayal, they thought love alone could fix. Relationships. After betrayal, they realize respect matters more. Because without respect, love becomes emotional slavery. The empath begins rebuilding themselves quietly. They spend more time alone. They reflect deeply. They reconnect with their intuition. They analyze every emotional pattern they ignored. And during this period, something powerful happens. The empath starts rediscovering their worth. This is the moment where healing truly begins. Not when the pain disappears. Not when the betrayer apologizes. Not when closure arrives. Healing begins the moment the empath stops blaming themselves. That is the turning point. Because betrayal often convinces good people they were too much or not enough, too emotional, too trusting, too caring, too sensitive. But eventually the empath realizes the truth. Their kindness was never the problem. The problem was giving loyalty to someone incapable of valuing it. And once this realization settles into the soul, the empath becomes stronger than before, not louder, not more aggressive, just stronger. They stop needing validation. They stop proving themselves. They stop fighting for people who constantly disrespect them. Instead, they begin focusing on peace. And peace becomes their new priority. This is why a healed empath becomes extremely difficult to manipulate, because they no longer fear losing people. That fear used to control them. They used to tolerate emotional pain because they feared abandonment. They feared conflict. They feared disappointing others. But betrayal forces growth. It teaches the empath that losing themselves is far more dangerous than losing relationships. That lesson changes everything. Now they choose honesty over attachment. They choose boundaries over approval. They choose peace over emotional chaos. And the people who once benefited from their unlimited patience suddenly cannot recognize them anymore. Because the empath finally learned how to say no. No to disrespect. No to emotional manipulation. No to fake loyalty. No to relationships that drain the soul. And when an empath reaches this stage, they become unstoppable. Not because they hate people, but because they finally understand their own value. The most powerful thing about a betrayed empath is this. They still remain capable of love, despite the pain, despite the disappointment, despite the emotional scars. That is strength. Anyone can become cold. Anyone can become bitter. Anyone can destroy others after being hurt. But a healed empath does something different. They become wiser without losing their humanity. That takes emotional power. However, there is another side people rarely discuss. When a good empath is betrayed repeatedly, they can reach emotional exhaustion. This is not ordinary sadness. This is soul fatigue. The empath becomes tired of carrying emotional burdens, tired of forgiving, tired of explaining, tired of loving people who only appreciate them after losing them. And during this phase, the empath may disappear emotionally, not physically, emotionally. They stop opening up. They stop sharing their pain. They stop expecting understanding. Many people mistake this for arrogance or indifference. But the truth is much deeper. The empath is emotionally protecting what remains of their peace. Because betrayal teaches them that not everyone deserves access to their inner world. This emotional withdrawal is often misunderstood, but it is actually survival. A betrayed empath eventually realizes that constantly being emotionally available for everyone can become dangerous. Some people only approach empaths for emotional healing. They take comfort, support, loyalty, and understanding, but give nothing meaningful in return. And after enough betrayal, the empath begins recognizing emotional imbalance immediately. Now they notice one-sided conversations. They notice who only contacts them during personal crises. They notice who disappears when the empath needs support. Their awareness becomes sharper. And because of this awareness, their circle becomes smaller. But something beautiful also happens. The empath begins attracting healthier relationships. Why? Because boundaries filter people. When an empath finally values themselves, toxic individuals lose easy access. Manipulators become uncomfortable. Emotionally immature people feel challenged, but genuine people stay. Healthy relationships respect boundaries. Healthy people do not punish honesty. Healthy connections do not require emotional self-sacrifice. And this realization completely changes how the empath approaches love and friendship. Now they no longer chase emotional intensity. They chase emotional safety. That is maturity. The healed empath understands that peace is more valuable than temporary excitement. They stop confusing chaos with passion. They stop romanticizing emotional suffering. They stop trying to rescue broken people at the cost of their own mental health. Instead, they begin asking powerful questions. Does this relationship bring peace into my life? Do I feel respected? Can I be emotionally safe around this person? Those questions protect the empath from repeating old patterns. And this is where the betrayed empath becomes truly powerful, because they stop abandoning themselves to keep others comfortable. For years, many empaths silence their own needs. They prioritize everyone else. They carry emotional responsibilities that were never theirs. Betrayal wakes them up. It forces them to finally ask, who has been protecting me? That question changes everything, because the empath suddenly realizes they spent years giving people emotional treatment they never received themselves. And once they understand this imbalance, they stop settling for crumbs. This does not mean they become selfish. It means they finally become emotionally balanced. There is a huge difference. A healthy empath learns how to care without self-destruction. That lesson is life-changing. Many betrayed empaths also experience another transformation. Their intuition becomes incredibly strong. Pain sharpens awareness. After betrayal, the empath starts sensing emotional dishonesty faster. They recognize inconsistency. They notice hidden disrespect in tone, behavior, and energy. Things they once ignored now stand out immediately, because betrayal trained them to observe deeply. And while the experience was painful, it also gave them emotional wisdom most people never develop. Now they understand that words mean nothing without consistency. Promises mean nothing without action. Attention means nothing without sincerity. This emotional wisdom protects them moving forward, and eventually something incredible happens. The empath stops trying to be understood by everyone. That is freedom. Before healing, they constantly explained themselves. They tried proving their intentions. They overanalyzed conversations. They worried about disappointing people. But after betrayal and growth, they realized something powerful. People who truly value you do not constantly force you to prove your worth. That realization removes emotional pressure. Now the empath moves differently. They become calmer, more selective, more private, more observant. Not because they lost their heart, but because they finally learned that emotional energy is precious, and they stop giving it to everyone. This is often the phase where old relationships begin collapsing. People who benefited from the empath's lack of boundaries become frustrated. Why? Because the empath is no longer easy to manipulate. Now they say, I deserve respect. I need honesty. I will not tolerate emotional games. And toxic people hate boundaries they cannot control. So they may accuse the empath of changing. They may call them cold. They may say the empath became distant. But what truly happened is simple. The empath stopped accepting emotional mistreatment. That is not cruelty. That is growth. One of the deepest truths about betrayal is this. Sometimes betrayal is the event that introduces you to your real strength. Before the pain, the empath often underestimated themselves. They depended emotionally on relationships. They attached their self-worth to how others treated them. But betrayal forces independence. And through that painful process, the empath discovers resilience they never knew existed. They realize they can survive heartbreak. They realize they can rebuild alone. They realize they can walk away from unhealthy connections. That discovery creates confidence. Not loud confidence. Not arrogant confidence. Quiet confidence. The kind that no longer needs constant reassurance. And this is why many empaths become incredibly powerful after betrayal. Because once a deeply loving person learns boundaries, emotional awareness, self-respect, and inner peace, they become nearly impossible to control. That combination is rare. They still care deeply. But now they also protect themselves deeply. That balance changes everything. And perhaps the most painful part for the betrayer is this. The empath eventually stops caring.